All right. Hello there, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another conscious parenting class. Just wanted to give you something a little silly to laugh at the beginning of this one. So tonight, we are going to be talking about attention and assertiveness. Okay. So as always, welcome to Basically Parent Therapy. This is a safe space. You're welcome here. Your parenting struggles are welcome here, and I encourage you to let your guard down and be vulnerable. We've all done things wrong with our kids. We're going to mess up. We are human. That's okay. But this is just an opportunity for us to reflect and think about what we want to try differently or to try to do better to make goals for ourselves as parents moving forward in our parenting journey. So just remember, let it go. This is all about progress and not perfection. It's the journey. There's going to be mistakes, and there's going to be successes. So my expectations and values for these classes are that all parents are doing the best they can with the knowledge and resources they have available to them. So get comfortable with being vulnerable and making those mistakes. Progress, not perfection. And then you can't do it all. You can't learn all of this overnight. That's not how that works. We have to start with one thing at a time. So just pick one thing from today's class to take with you to try to implement with your child. Okay. All right, a quick introduction for anyone who doesn't know me. My name's Lucy. I have a degree in early childhood education. I've been a teacher for over 7 years. I am now working with parents as teachers, as a parent educator, and then I also volunteer and I'm on the board for Postpartum Support International for the Missouri chapter. I'm pretty fluent in conscious discipline and project approach, social constructivist learning. I've also had experience in international baccalaureate accreditation and implementation. And so, and then I've done many trainings in trauma-informed support in women and children. Okay, so just a little refresher about conscious discipline. If you like more of a refresher, go back and watch the introduction course. It's about 2 hours long. But conscious discipline is an evidence-based and trauma-informed approach. This is not new information. This is not a parenting fad. This is research-based information. This research has been going on for a very long time. It's just becoming a little bit more mainstream now and accessible to the public. It is an adult-first discipline model, and it utilizes brain science research. Okay, so this is all about how our brain works as humans, not just with our children, but as humans. And then how can we take that information and implement it when we're parenting our children? Okay. So a little refresher about the brain states. Again, if you want to know more about this, go back and watch the introduction class. We have the survival state, and that is when you are functioning or your child is functioning out of your brainstem. Okay, that is your fight, flight, or freeze response or fawn response. This part of your brain is asking, am I safe? Your child and you cannot logic from the survival state. It's impossible. Next, we have the emotional state. That's our limbic system, our emotional part of our brain. This is where we get a lot of crying and whining and yelling, but not really is that physical response, not that instinctual survival response that we see. And this part of the brain is asking, am I loved? Am I connected? And then we have the executive state. This is our prefrontal cortex. And this is where your child or someone you're working with or yourself is functioning out of your prefrontal lobe, prefrontal cortex, and you are calm, you're cooperative, you can make choices, and your brain in this moment is asking, what can I learn? What can I accomplish? Okay. So again, if you want to know more about that, we go a little bit more in depth in the intro class. So this is just a little refresher. All right, to start tonight, we're going to watch this video.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make? Go! The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
Okay. We're gonna watch another one. Oh, I think I need to go back for a second because okay. All right, watch this one. Some of you may have seen that last one. That one circulated the internet for quite a while, some years ago. This one I really, really love because this one definitely got me. So
Really, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away.
That's right, madam.
It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
21 changes.
Action. Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
That one really got me. I think I caught maybe the bear that switched out to the man in the armory. And then I think I caught like the flowers in the front changing from like the roses to like the lilies. But there was a lot of changes in that one that if you were not really, really closely paying attention, you did not see. Okay. So we're not going to watch this one. It's very similar. If you've ever watched brain games, they do the same thing. There's multiple changes that happen. They ask you to pay attention to one thing, and there's many other things happening during the shift. Okay. So this is what we call the power of attention in conscious discipline. And I want you to think about like either using like the telescope or I think of a flashlight often with this skill or with this power. So here's a picture. I want you to just look at it really quickly. What do you notice? Right? Many of you are going to very quickly notice there's a car accident. There's an emergency vehicle. Okay. Not many of us will focus in on the fact that there are the firefighters or the paramedics there helping, right? Our attention first goes to the accident. Okay. I have a reason for this. We're going to talk about it more. Same thing. I'm going to show you another picture. I just want you to quick response. What's your first thing that you pay attention to? Okay. Probably notice a child coloring on the wall. With that one, you probably notice two children fighting or pushing and shoving each other. Okay. So my point with that is that we are very quick to notice the negative things. And our brain is wired to do that for a reason. A lot of it is part of that survival brain, right? That if we notice the things around that could hurt us or harm us, we're very quick to go to those things. Our brain wants to be aware of those things. We're not so often quick to notice the positives, okay? So this video is a little bit long, but it's really, really good. And it talks about getting stuck in those negatives and just some really interesting studies that they did with this. And so while it is a little bit long, I really love it. And I think that it's a great lesson for anyone. And then we'll continue to talk about this concept.
Hi, everyone. Gosh, I wish I could dance, but I can't, and you really don't want me to. So instead, I thought I would talk a little today about how people think. I'm fascinated by this question. I'm a social psychologist, which basically means I'm a professional people watcher. So this is what I do. I try to figure out how humans think and how we might be able to think better. And here's something I noticed a few years ago about how I seem to think. Here's a typical week in my life, which usually seems to revolve entirely around publishing papers. So here I am in the maximum of my artistic abilities as a stick figure, going along at baseline, and a paper gets accepted. I get this rush, this blip of happiness, and then I'm back to baseline by about lunchtime. A few days later, a paper might get rejected, and that feels pretty awful. And I wait for that blip to end, but somehow I just can't stop thinking about it. And here's the craziest part. Even if another paper gets accepted the next day, well, that's nice, but somehow I can't get that pesky rejection out of my head. So what is going on here? Why does a failure seem to stick in our minds so much longer than a success? Well, together with my colleague Amber Boydston in the political science department, I started thinking about this question of, do our minds get stuck in the negatives? We all know intuitively that there are different ways of thinking about things. The same glass, the saying goes, can be seen as half full or half empty. And there's a lot of research in the social sciences showing that depending on how you describe the glass to people, as half full or half empty, it changes how they feel about it. So if you describe the glass as half full, this is called a gain frame because you're focusing on what's gained, then people like it. But if you describe the same glass as half empty, a loss frame, then people don't like it. But we wondered, what happens when you try to switch from thinking about it one way to thinking about it another way? Can people shift back and forth, or do they get stuck in one way of thinking about it? Does one of these labels, in other words, tend to stick more in the mind? Well, to investigate this question, we conducted a simple experiment. We told participants in our experiment about a new surgical procedure, and we randomly assigned them to one of two conditions. For participants in the first condition, the first group, we described the surgical procedure in terms of gains. We said it had a 70% success rate. And for participants in the second group, we described the procedure in terms of losses. We said it had a 30% failure rate. So it's the exact same procedure. We're just focusing people's attention on the part of the glass that's full or the part of the glass that's empty. Perhaps unsurprisingly, people like the procedure when it's described as having a 70% success rate, and they don't like it when it's described as having a 30% failure rate. But then we added a twist. We told participants in the first group, you could think of this as a 30% failure rate. And now they don't like it anymore. They've changed their minds. And we told participants in the second group, you could think of this as a 70% success rate, but unlike the first group, they stuck with their initial opinion. They seem to be stuck in the initial loss frame that they saw at the beginning of the study. We conducted another experiment. This time, we told participants about the current governor of an important state who was running for participants. And we said that when the current governor took office, statewide budget cuts were expected to affect about 10,000 jobs. And then half the participants read that under the current governor's leadership, 40% of these jobs had been saved. And they like the current governor. They think he's doing a great job. The rest of the participants read that under the current governor's leadership, 60% of these jobs had been lost. And they don't like the current governor. They think he's doing a terrible job. But then once more, we added a twist. For participants in the first group, we reframed the information in terms of losses. And now they didn't like the current governor anymore. And for participants in the second group, we reframed the information in terms of gains. But just like in the first study, this didn't seem to matter. People in this group still didn't like the current governor. So notice what this means. Once the loss frame gets in there, it sticks. People can't go back to thinking about jobs saved once they've thought about jobs lost. So in both of these scenarios, actually, the current governor gets ousted in favor of his opponent. Well, at this point, we were getting curious. Why does this happen? Could it be that it's actually mentally harder for people to convert from losses to gains than it is for them to go from gains to losses? So we conducted a third study to test how easily people could convert from one frame to another. This time, we told participants, imagine there's been an outbreak of an unusual disease and 600 lives are at stake. And we asked participants in one group, if 100 lives are saved, how many will be lost? And we asked participants in the other group, if 100 lives are lost, how many will be saved? So everyone just has to calculate 600 minus 100 and come up with the answer of 500. But whereas people in one group have to convert from gains to losses in order to do that, people in the second group have to convert from losses to gains. We timed how long it took them to solve this simple math problem. And what we found was that when people had to convert from gains to losses, they could solve the problem quite quickly. It took them about 7 seconds on average. But when they had to convert from losses to gains, well, now it took them far longer, almost 11 seconds. So this suggests that once we think about something as a loss, that way of thinking about it tends to stick in our heads and to resist our attempts to change it. What I take away from this research and from related research is that our view of the world has a fundamental tendency to tilt toward the negative. It's pretty easy to go from good to bad, but far harder to shift from bad to good. We literally have to work harder to see the upside of things. And this matters. So think about the economy. Here's economic well-being from 2007 to 2010. And you can see it tanked, just like we all remember. And then by late 2010, it had recovered by most objective measures. But here's consumer confidence over the same time period. You can see it tanks right along with the economy, but then it seems to get stuck. Instead of rebounding with the economy itself, consumers seem to be psychologically stuck back there in the recession. So oddly then, it may take more effort to change our minds about how the economy is doing than to change the economy itself. On a more personal level, what this research means to me is that you have to work to see the upside. Literally, this takes work. This takes effort. And you can practice this. You can train your mind to do this better. There's research out of UC Davis showing that just writing for a few minutes each day about things that you're grateful for can dramatically boost your happiness and well-being and even your health. We can also rehearse good news and share it with others. We tend to think, right, that misery loves company, that venting will help get rid of our negative emotions, that we'll feel better if we just talk about how terrible our day was. And so we talk. And we talk, and we talk about the boss who's driving us crazy, and the friend who never called us back, and the meeting at work where every little thing that could go wrong did. But we forget to talk about the good stuff. And yet that's exactly where our minds need the most practice. So my husband, who has this disconcerting habit of listening to what I say other people should do, and then pointing out that technically speaking, I'm a person too, has taken to listening to me for about 2 minutes on days when I come home all grumpy and complaining about everything. And he listens and he says, okay, but what happened today that was good? And so I tell him about the student who came up to me after class with this really interesting, insightful question. And I tell him about the friend who emailed me out of the blue this morning just to say hello. And somewhere in the telling, I start to smile. And I start to think that maybe my day was pretty decent after all. I think we can also work in our communities to focus on the upside. We can be more aware that bad tends to stick. One mean comment can stick with somebody all day, all week even. And bad tends to propagate itself, right? Somebody snaps at you and you snap back, and you snap at the next guy too. But what if the next time somebody snapped at you, you forgave them? What if the next time you had a really grumpy waitress, you left her an extra large tip? Our minds may be built to look for negative information and to hold on to it. But we can also retrain our minds if we put some effort into it and start to see that the glass may be a little more full than we initially thought. Thank you.
Okay, so she kind of talks about like how this looks actually in practice. And so thinking back at those photos that I showed you a few minutes ago, just like I mentioned, our power of attention here is also kind of working in tandem with our power of positive intent. So here, our quick focus is going to be on the car accident. And I'm not saying that the car accident shouldn't get our attention. It's going to get our attention. But when we are training our brain to look for the positive or to look for the good that's happening, right? Then we might start to pay more attention to like, wow, these paramedics were so responsive so quickly, and look at them, they're helping to, get the people are already out of the car, they're safe, they're in the emergency vehicle, they're helping to clear up the road, they're right, so all these wonderful things. When we talk about our children, our first instinct is like, oh my gosh, he drew all over the wall, right? We see this kid who's just creating this major destruction. And instead, we don't see the little child who is possibly becoming like a little artist, right? Like this is our little blooming artist right here, or who wanted to make a beautiful picture for mom or dad. Maybe they didn't execute it in the way that we had hoped, but we're looking for where our attention is going. Same thing with this one of the children. Our first instinct is to go towards like, oh, they're pushing and shoving. I need to break up this fight. Oh, they're arguing over this. Somebody's going to get hurt. Instead of thinking, wow, I see two children who are both really excited to play with this toy, this cool new scooter we got. Okay. So what are we putting our attention on? Conscious discipline tells us that what we focus on, we get more of. So again, I want you to think about the flashlight or the telescope for your reminder for this one. So when we choose to shine our light or focus our light onto the positive things that we want with our kids, you're going to get more of those things. Um, and what is our focus going to? Is it the beer in the night, or is it going towards teaching, modeling, highlighting desired behaviors that we want to see? So when I was teaching in a classroom with early childhood, young kiddos, preschoolers, 3 years old, and I've taught older, but in this example, they were little 3-year-olds. And they were all just like, there's 17 of them. And it's just like chaos in the room. They're all just like running around. I'm trying to get circle time started for our morning meeting. And I'm asking them to come sit on the rug. And they're all just like rolling all over the floor, as you've probably seen in your child's daycare classrooms or preschool classrooms before. And they're just like kicking each other and like throwing toys and whatever. And so I come over and I don't see any child that's doing what they're supposed to be doing. Not one child is doing what I've asked for them to sit in the circle time rug, crisscross, hands in their lap. So I just fake it, essentially. And I basically am like, oh my goodness, there's one child who's like, she is sitting, but she's not really like, we're not sitting crisscross. She's kind of wiggly. She's like leaning up against something. And I'm like, oh, I notice that little Susie she's sitting crisscross. She is ready to go. She is so quiet. Her body is still. And then what happens is, even though I'm kind of faking it a little bit, she immediately gets herself in that position and gets her body ready because she's like, oh my gosh, I'm getting attention for doing the right thing. And so then the other children see this and they're like, oh, we want that attention too. And so then other children start to do it. And as they start to do it, I start to notice them as well. Oh, I notice now Becky is sitting crisscross and Tommy is sitting crisscross and oh, James is sitting crisscross. And one by one, all these little children are doing exactly what I need them to do because I didn't put my frustration and my focus on, hey, I told you to sit crisscross. You're not sitting crisscross. Why are you rolling all over the floor? I didn't do that. I put all my attention on the children that were doing the right thing. Just highlighting those desired behaviors. So this is what we have to do with our kids. When you're upset and frustrated and angry, when you're always focused on what you don't want. So if you're in that emotional state, if you are not in that conscious part of your brain, that frontal cortex, if you're in that emotional state, you're only going to be focused on what you don't want to be happening. And you're resisting what is. Okay. This is that power of acceptance that we've talked about before. So you have to stop, collect yourself, and then pivot and refocus on what you want to be occurring. Okay. And the only way we can do that is from that conscious part of our brain. Another great example of this, and just like I mentioned in my example before, is to make a visual picture in your child's mind of what that you want them to be doing. Make that visual picture of what that desired behavior is. So just like I pretended with my little friend that she was sitting crisscross and her hands were in her lap and her voice was quiet and she was ready to go. I created that mental picture for her of what I wanted the behavior to look like. Okay? Children think in pictures. So actually, I'm going to go back to this. Just like if I told you over and over and over again, don't think of a blue snowman. Don't think of a blue snowman. Stop thinking of a blue snowman. It's incredibly hard to do that because I've put the mental picture of a blue snowman in your head. But instead, if I say, hey, think about an orange snowman, now you're thinking about the orange snowman. And I'm telling you what I want you to do, right? So this is an example of a social story or a visual picture of what I wanted a transition to look like with my own child. Little context for this, my children go to their grandma's house one day a week while I'm working. And they hang out with Grammy all day long, and leaving Grammy's is really, really hard. Grammy lets them do whatever they want, eat whatever they want. I've let that fight go. She is living up her grandma era, and I love that for her. And so they just have so much fun there, and I'm so lucky that they have that. But it's really hard to leave grandma's house when it's time to go. And there are often terrible, who's 3. And every time I went to pick her from Grammy's, it was a full-on tantrum meltdown. It was like pulling teeth to get her out of the house, let alone buckled into her car seat. It was like fighting with her, trying to force her into this car seat, buckle her, and like just screaming and tantruming. And I want to stay with Grammy, and I need one more hug and one more chocolate chip and one more. I mean, just like full on tantrum. And then I would have to listen to this meltdown on the 25-30 minute ride home with my kids, just screaming in the car for 30 minutes. And that's really not how I wanted to end my day after I had been working all day long. And it's just hard. And then trying to wind down for bedtime, it's just like, it sets everyone up for this really, really yucky experience. And I get that. I've lived this with you guys. I know what this stuff is like. And so after multiple occasions of this, I was like, what am I doing? This isn't working. This isn't working. It's not working for my kid. It's not working for me. Everyone feels yucky. We've got to reframe this. And so I created a social story. And these are really, really helpful with young children because, again, they're creating that mental picture in their mind. And so what a social story is it's breaking down what a transition or what something in their day might look like, or a situation, whatever you need this for, and you really break it down for them and create a picture of exactly what it's going to look like step by step. And if possible, give them as much choice in those transitions as you possibly can. And so you can see in this one, mommy is going to let Grammy know that she's coming. And Lumi, my daughter, will help get Grammy's all the stuff, help take all the stuff to the door with Grammy and set it by the door so it's ready to go. Then I get to pick one more thing to play. Then mommy comes to pick us up. Then I get to pick one thing to carry out to the car, either my book or my levy. I can walk to the car with Grammy, or Grammy can carry me. Mommy's going to buckle me into the car seat. I can help do the top buckle. When I'm buckled, Grammy will give me a kiss or a wave goodbye, whichever I choose. When I'm in my car seat on the way home, I can look at my book or snuggle my levy. At home, either mommy or daddy will get me out of the car seat, and then I'm home, right? So I've created this whole visual picture with choice included of exactly what that transition is going to look like. Then I printed this book out. I read it to my daughter multiple times, leading up to the day that we were going to be at Grammy's. Read it multiple times that week, read it multiple times the morning before I sent her to Grammy's, left the book with Grammy. Grammy read it a couple times. Grammy read it again right before or right after I had texted that I was coming to get them. And then when I got there, we read it one more time. And then we followed the transition. no meltdown. None. The first time I implemented it, no meltdown, because I had created this very secure, loving visual picture of what was going to take place. And children love knowing what's going to happen next. So I'm not saying this is going to work perfectly every time. Okay. I'm not saying that it's going to work the first time you do it with your child, like it did with my child in this instance. But these kinds of strategies can really, really help cut down on some of those tantrums and really help support your child in knowing what's coming. And again, I was resisting before with the tantrums and the meltdown, I was resisting what was instead of accepting that it was hard to leave Grammys and finding proactive ways to help my child be successful in those situations. And your child is going to get your attention one way or the other. It's either going to be positive or negative. They don't really care. They are wired for attention and connection. They're looking for it. And so you get to choose. Are you putting your time and your attention in stopping the meltdown when it's already happening? Because you can. I spent just as much time making this social story as I could have trying to stop the meltdown, right? But I chose to refocus my attention on what I wanted instead of on what I didn't want to be taking place. You can't solve a problem by focusing on what you don't want. You can only solve problems by focusing on what you want and consciously making decisions on how to get there. Okay. So highlight those behaviors that you do want. And I'm saying, talk about them all the time with your kids. Let's stop focusing on like, hey, stop doing that. I told you not to do that. Don't take that from your brother. Don't rip things out of his hands. Don't climb on the tree on what you do want. Oh, I see you took a turn with your brother. That was really kind. I notice you're waiting patiently. I know it's so hard to wait patiently. And again, these are things that you can fake a little bit. There have absolutely been times where I'm standing in line somewhere with my kids and my kids are starting to melt down. And I acknowledge that it's really hard. And I tell them they're doing a really great job of waiting and that they're doing it. I point it out. I'm like, oh my gosh, I know it's so hard to wait. It's so frustrating. And you're doing it. You're doing a great job waiting. I know it's really hard. And what they do is they take that acknowledgement that they are doing it. It is hard, but they are doing it. And I've brought them from that emotional state of, yeah, it's hard. I see you. This is tough, to that frontal cortex of like, okay, I'm ready to be cooperative, right? Because I've acknowledged them. Acknowledge them when they're sitting safely in a chair, using a calm and helpful voice, asking for help, using walking feet, quiet voices, all these things, right? So I want you to refocus your attention with your kid instead of on what they don't want all the time or what you don't want them to be doing, to focus on what you do want them to be doing. Find the things that they're doing right and point them out all the time, right? Shine a flashlight on those behaviors, because the more you do that, the more you're going to get those behaviors. Okay? Because they realize that's how they're getting your attention and connection. So they're going to do more of it. So I want you to think right now, just take a moment to reflect. What behaviors are getting your attention? What's getting your negative attention truly? And how can we reframe it? How can we reframe it to the positive? Okay. And if you practice that thought now, the next time that situation arises, you'll be more prepared and ready to use the positive. Okay. All right. So this also brings us now, the partnering skill for the power of attention is assertiveness. Okay. And I want you to think about, many of us were not raised to be assertive. Many of us were raised like the characters here on the left to be passive. I don't know. I'm unsure. I'm just gonna wait until somebody else makes the choices and decisions, right? Like many of us are raised to be very passive people pleasers. Or some of you might have been raised on the complete opposite over here on the right-hand side, to be like almost aggressive. Like this man's leaning across the table. He's like coming at you. He's like, nope, this is how we're going to do it. This woman feels very closed off, very aggressive, like, no. Whereas we have the two in the center who feel confident and secure, but they're not passive and they're not giving an aggressive tone, right? What is yours? What were you raised to be? Were you raised to be passive, aggressive? Both passive aggressive, right? So passive, when we're working with our children, sounds like, hey, could you go clean up your toys for me, please, honey? Right? Aggressive would be, hey, I told you 3 times already, go clean up those toys right now. I'm not going to ask you again. And then there's the passive aggressive, which is the, well, I guess you're not going to be getting any dinner because you haven't cleaned up your toys. Right? And like many of you, you've probably done all 3 of these. And maybe all 3 of these within like 5 minutes. So here's what we want. Oh, I'm sorry. So the passive tone offers children a choice when there really isn't one. Okay. It tells them that they can say no. And then when they do say no, then we feel attacked and triggered because they wouldn't do something to please us, right? Like, honey, would you please pick up your toys? No. And it's like, I bought you these beautiful toys. Why are you being so hurtful to mommy? Right? It's offering a choice when there isn't one. And then I'm being the victim and being upset when they don't do what I've asked them to do because it was supposed to be for me. And this invites a lot of disappointment and frustration in us as parents. And so then we have the aggressive. And this feels threatening and like an attack. And this one is working against you very, very quickly because the first one, the passive, invites the power struggle. This one sends your child straight into fight or flight. And now you have to work out of 2 different brain states to bring them back to that frontal cortex. So when you're acting aggressive with them, they're very quickly just going to go to that fight or flight state. And now you have nothing near a cooperative child. You have a child who is either going to fight, or they're going to flee, or they're going to break down in tears. It's not working with you at all. It's not teaching them anything. Okay. And then the passive aggressive tone sounds just confusing. It invites that power struggle. And then it makes them feel shame for like, well, I thought I had a choice, but then you got mad at me. So I guess I didn't have a choice. And now you're making me feel yucky about it. Okay. So we want to work on our power of being assertive. Power is not controlling other people. Power is controlling yourself. Trying to control other people is the first sign that you are entirely out of control. Controlling others is what weak people think power looks like. Okay. I love this quote. I have to remind myself of this all the time. Because it's very easy to think that like, oh, we just want to control our children. You can't control your child. They are a human being. Okay. You cannot force them to eat. You cannot force them to sleep. You cannot force them to go to the bathroom. You cannot force, which is why those 3 things typically become the biggest power struggles, by the way, because they very quickly learn that they have control over those things. So don't power struggle with your kids. Instead, we want to use an assertive voice. Assertive sounds like fact. It's like stating a command. So this is just like, the sky is blue. The sky is blue. I'm not going to argue about that. The sky is blue. Right? It's calm, it's confident, it's secure. There is 0 tone of doubt. It invites that safety and compliance, and it gives you a clear understanding of what to do. So just like we've talked about the paramedics before, I love to use this example. If you are in fight or flight, if you are like in a car accident, a good paramedic is not going to come to you and start yelling at you. They're not going to be like, hey, I told you to stay still. Stop moving. They're not going to do that. They're also not going to be like, honey, could you stop? I know you're scared, but like, please stop moving. Okay. Like they're not going to do that either because they need you to feel how calm and secure they are so that you can regulate yourself. They're going to come in and they'll be like, hey, I've got you. Stay still. I'm going to cut you out of this vehicle. Okay. It's very calm and secure. Now, a common trigger that I see with parents when we talk about this skill is that they want their children to be polite and learn manners. Here's the difficult thing with that. Manners and being polite and using please and thank you are when someone is doing something for you. Okay. If they are not doing it for you, then it's not a time to use the please and the thank you and worry about being polite. For example, if I'm sitting at a table and I need someone to pass me the bread, right? Because I want another piece of bread. That's for me. Could you pass me the bread, please? It's for me, right? They don't have to do it. I could reach over and grab the bread, but I'm asking them to do that for me. If I'm asking my child to get dressed, it's not for me. They need to get dressed because we have to go out the door to school or to work or whatever, right? It's not for me. It's just the expectation of what we have to do. So assertive says, this is not a choice, just do it. Focus on using please and thank you with your child when it's for you and when they truly do have a choice. Okay. All right. I know some of us have to unlearn this one. This one's really hard. Okay. So when we're talking with our kids and we're working on this assertiveness skill, we want to say their name. We want to give them the verb of exactly what we want them to do and to paint that picture. Okay. Here's some examples. Boop. I have two examples of here with my own child of using like that assertive skill. You're going to notice a couple of things in these videos. This first one, you're going to notice that I also focus a lot on connection. You'll very, very frequently, if I'm in a classroom working with kids or with my own children, I'll have them stop and find my eyes, because what that does is it meets that need for connection, that emotional part of the brain, before I give the direction. Okay, so you'll frequently hear me say, stop, find my eyes. And then when they do find your eyes and you know you're connected, you're meeting that emotional need, then light up, right? Your children are going to want to stop and look at you and listen to directions when they see that every time they do, your face just lights up with happiness, okay? To like connect with them. Sometimes I'll also offer like a hug or a hand squeeze. Those are also great ways to meet connection. We'll do this one first, and then I'll give a little intro for the second video.
Hey, stop. Find my.
Well, let's try this again.
Hey, stop. Find my eyes. Come here. Walk over to mom. I know you want me to roll you. I'm gonna give you a hug, and I just want you to know we have 5 minutes till nap time for Roos, and then it's time for us to go play something else. Okay. Okay. What I need you to do? Hey, wait. Find my eyes. Find my eyes. Thank you. Okay. Do you see the red box over there on the ground? Do you see the red box? Yeah. I need you to pick that up and move it so Roos doesn't fall on it. Let's go pick it up and bring it back over here. Okay, pick it up. Walk it over here to mom. Thank you. You guys won't fall. Okay, now you can go play for a minute, okay? Mom, please roll me.
Okay, so you can see how my daughter was taking the direction, right? It was very calm, it was assertive, it was a command, and she did it. I did catch myself saying thank you at one point in there, because it's hard to unlearn this stuff, but I gave the command, and then when she did it, I was like, okay, thanks, right? Okay, this next one, she's playing with the iPad, which for all of us, we know giving up the iPad, getting them to give up the iPad is always really, really tough. It's like they're programmed to be that way. Here's what you don't see in this video. I have prepped her with the idea that dinner is coming. It's almost time to be done with the iPad. You have 5 more minutes. You have 3 more minutes. You have 2 more minutes of iPad time. So timers also work really well with children of this age, or like being able to count down and know and having that prep, right? So that's the part of this video that you are not seeing. Okay. These videos are lagging. I'm sorry. Let's try again.
All right, Louie, go ahead and put the iPad on the counter and go take a seat for dinner.
Ah, such a bummer. Hold on. Try one more time.
All right, Louie, go ahead and put the iPad on the counter and go take a seat for dinner. Yeah, Drew's eating dinner too. Go put the iPad on the counter. Nope, you may put it on the counter or in the basket. Counter or basket? Do you want to put it on the counter or in the basket? The table was not a choice. So you want to put it on the counter or in the basket? Okay, put it on the counter. Run there on the counter. Thanks. Then you can go sit for lunch or dinner. Sure.
Okay, so you can see I gave the command, the assertive voice. Limi got her eyes. She looked at me, see the connection. And then I said, go put the iPad on the counter. It's time for dinner. And she starts to do it. She does start to do it. She gets up, she walks across. She's like, oh, it's time for dinner with my brother. Yeah, time for dinner with your brother. Go sit. She starts to go over there. And then she gets to the table and she's like, oh, I don't want to give up this iPad. I want it. We all know that feeling. And so that's fine. What I did there is that I swept in with my other conscious discipline skills, which we'll talk about at another class, is the 2 positive choices. So then I offer, nope, you can put it on the counter or in the basket, right? So I like swoop in and I catch her before I see her fall out from that. Now she wants to put it on the table. Here's what I will tell you when we get to like conscious discipline choices is I could have said yes, but I also know my child and I know that she is a 3rd choice child and she wants, if I give an inch with the iPad with choices, then it's going to continue. So the iPad is something that I'm very tight with my boundaries for the choices. So I don't allow for that 3rd choice. And I just, you hear me say it. Nope, that wasn't a choice. Put it here or here. Just very, very calm, very confident, very assertive. Okay. All right. Assertiveness is a skill that we need to teach our children because it's our #1 bully prevention program. This is such an important skill for your kids. I will die on this hill. This is one of the biggest things that I am very passionate about teaching children. This is how we teach our kids that our words have power and meaning, and they are meant to be heard and respected. Okay. So instead of asking passively if your child could please be nice or to stop yelling or could I have a turn, teach your child the skill. Oh, you want a turn. Put your hand out and say, may I have a turn now, please? Or to, oh, I don't like it when you hit me, hands off, right? Teach them how to be assertive. This is important. This teaches them how to set boundaries, okay? So I'm going to tell you a little story about my kiddo and an example of this. I took my kids to the Magic House one day and they love playing in the sandbox. That's like their favorite thing to do there, which is great for me because then I don't have to clean up sand. And so my daughter was playing and she had this, you can see this like little bowl bucket, and she was using the scoop and she was putting the sand into the bucket. And they were the only ones playing there for a while. And she had the bucket like right in front of her at one point, and she was scooping into it. And another child walked up and he reached over and she was like leaning, I don't know, to scoop over something. And he kind of reached under her and he grabbed the bucket, right? Not maliciously. He just wanted a toy to play with. It was fine. And she looked at me. She stopped after he took it and she looked at me and she was like, what? I'm using this bucket. Like he just took this bucket, Mom, like fix this for me. Right. And I looked at her, I sat back and I looked at her and I said, I noticed he took your bucket. If you want it back, you should tell him and say, I want my bucket back. I'm still using that. And so she did. She turned to the child and she looked at him and she was like, hey, I'm still using that. Give it back to me. I'm not done. And I will tell you, this is kind of where again, I know it's uncomfortable, right? This parent looked at me like, and I just your move. My child had every right to be playing with that bucket, just like any other child that comes into the space, right? And she was working with it. She wasn't done with it. There are other toys there, right? This child has, the other little boy had every opportunity to work with many other toys in the sandbox. And the child kind of looked at his dad like, know it's uncomfortable. Part of us wants to be like, "Oh, he did give the toy back. Good. It's not to share, but this is teaching assertiveness skills. This is important for them. Okay. I am going to show this video. I didn't show this in our actual class because we ran out of time, but I am going to show it here. This is this is a former gang leader that now tours and does classes with conscious discipline. He talked about how conscious discipline has changed his life. He does a lot of their presentations, and this is him talking about that skill of assertiveness and how he worked with his little brother on that skill. Okay.
Fight. That was our only option. We had a disagreement. We fought. We jumped people. So much violence. I never was a second thought. If you're close enough where I can put my hands on you, I'm hitting you in your mouth. That's just how I was. My brother, he bad too. He bad too. We was always being physical, we fight, that's what we do. That I didn't know that my words have power. Miss Porter taught me this through assertiveness. She taught me this. So now I'm able to go back and tell my this is what I want you to do. Hey, I don't do that. Next time, just call me Now, of course, to my little brother, he say, I'm not doing that. That make me look weak. I say, if you look at it like that, it does. But what type of weak person stand up and use his voice? He stepped back, thought about it. I said, only somebody who weak wouldn't open their mouth at all. So I say, it actually makes you strong just to go out there and say it, don't even get physical. I said, look, bro, just go try and come back and tell me. I left him with that. Now, I ain't gonna lie. I must admit, y'all, I don't know what was gonna happen. I just knew the next day my daddy was gonna call him, boy, your brother done fought. But can you believe my brother get off the bus with his backpack, the biggest smile ever? D. I said, what's up, little bro? He said, I did it. He said, I did it. I said, what you mean? He said, I went up to him. I said, bro, I don't like it when you call me that. He used to call me Marquise. I said, what happened? He looked at me and said, all right. I said, so what you think about that? He just shook his head and went inside. If only. When I was leaning up against that wall, I couldn't let him see this. But when I was leaning up against that wall, if only you knew how good that made me feel on the inside. Because I ain't gonna lie, I must admit, as a big brother, it used to make me feel good to say, man, punch him in his mouth. Be honest. As a big brother, it used to make me feel good to say, man, we don't tolerate that. If he say anything else to you, I want you to whap it. Come home and tell me about that. I must admit, it really did. But the feeling that I got to tell my little brother that his words have power and he can use his words, and for him to come back and tell me that it works, that feeling was much more powerful than him coming back into the mouth. It really was. And the only thing I can do is sit back and think about my first day of my senior year. I wouldn't have been able to teach my brother that skill if that first day wouldn't have happened. But if we go back even farther than that, I wouldn't be able to teach my little brother that skill if Miss Porter went and learned it from Dr. Bailey. If we go back farther than that, I wouldn't be able to teach my little brother this skill if Dr. Bailey never came up with this concept. And you know what my little brother do now? Jay, that's what I told Austin. What? I told him, Next time somebody messes with him, just tell him. And tell him what they want him to do, what he wanted him to do. I say, yeah. So can you believe my little brother who in the 5th grade is not teaching his friend that his words have power? Who his friend gonna go along and teach his little brother his words have power. So now, can you believe I started a whole new trend? Everybody wanna say their words.
I love that video so much. It makes me tear up. So you can see that this is such an important skill in our children. We cannot constantly encourage and reward compliance and people pleasing in our children when they're young, and then expect them to have this skill of assertiveness when they're older. I know it would be much more comfortable for me as a parent to have shrugged off my daughter at the magic house and been like, oh, honey, it's fine. There's other toys. Just grab another one. Give him the toy. It's okay. We can share. We can just like let him have it. It's not a big deal, right? I cannot do that in all good conscience and then know that my child will grow up to be assertive and be able to speak for the things that she needs and wants in her life and her relationships if I continue to reward compliance. Okay. It is okay to teach our children to be assertive. The reason it feels uncomfortable to us is because we were not taught that, right? So we have to encourage a skill. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She just wanted the toy that she was working with. Okay. And here's some of my personal favorites. Like I said, this assertiveness skill is probably one of my favorite. And so I will die on this hill about teaching children to be assertive. It is okay for children to teach other children to say like, hey, hands off. I don't like that. Move away from me. Give me space. Or give it back. I'm still using it. Stop. I don't like that. I need this. I don't want to play this game. Right? These are all assertiveness boundaries and skills to teach our kids. Feel free to screenshot this and use some of these with your own children. These are important bully prevention things for your children to learn. Okay. So talking about that, let's talk a little bit about boundaries, right? Whose job is it to respect your boundaries? If you said your families or your kids or your coworkers or whatever, your partner, I'm sorry to inform you, it's yours. The point of setting boundaries is not to change other people's behavior or to convince them to value the same things that you do. It is for you to advocate for yourself, regardless of how anyone else acts. Okay. A boundary is something you can enforce. You have to be willing to set a boundary. And then if you are willing to set the boundary, are you willing to enforce that boundary yourself, right? It's not about somebody else. A boundary is not a demand. It's not an expectation. It's not an ultimatum. It's not a threat. It's not a rule other people have to follow. It's not what a boundary is. A boundary is an action that you choose to protect yourself, your inner peace, and your values. It's about what you are willing to do, okay? This is so, so important. So here's some examples of types of boundaries. There are physical boundaries, like I need space. I don't want you to touch me. I don't want to hug, whatever. There are moral boundaries, things that you're not willing to do morally because they go against your code of ethics, essentially. There's emotional boundaries, right? And then we also have people with really rigid boundaries, people with very porous boundaries that are almost too flexible, right? That are walked all over. And then we have that middle line, that's healthy boundaries. Some examples of things that are not a boundary and what the boundary would be. So not a boundary would be, I'm overworked. I need you to have someone take on some of my workload, right? That's not a boundary. You can't make other people do things. What you can say is, I will not work more than 50 hours per week. That's my boundary. I'm going to do that. I'm going to work 50 hours per week. That's where I kept my limit. Okay. You need to stop hitting your sister. That's not a boundary. You can't force them to do that. What you can say is, I will not allow you to hit your sister. And then you are physically intervening. You are moving away. You are teaching the child to move away from that person, right? You need to eat all the food on your plate. No, you can't force someone to eat, right? You can say, I will not be serving another meal until breakfast. You can choose to eat it or not, but I'm not serving another meal until breakfast. Be aware. You will not yell at me like that. That's not a boundary. You can't force someone to stop yelling. You can say, if you choose to raise your voice at me, I will no longer engage in this conversation. I'm going to leave. Okay. These are boundaries you are holding for yourself. Okay. Imagine, again, why I'm so passionate about this, how different our world would be if in 10 to 20 years, when our little toddlers and babies that we're raising right now, if we instead stop putting value on them being compliant and polite, but we teach them to be assertive in setting their boundaries, imagine how much harm this prevents our kids from falling victim to. Truly, this prevents so much harm for them later in life or now, truly, even as children. Okay. It's important to teach children what they can do in situations when their boundaries are not being respected. Okay. And it's also okay to let them maybe feel things a little bit. Now, again, you're the parent, decide what's safe to do this. And try not to swoop in and save them. Help them establish those boundaries. Let me give you an example of this. I once worked in a classroom. This is my kindergarten class at the time. I had two boys who were just constantly like, oh, they just had like a hate-love relationship. They always sought each other out and it always ended terribly. It was just one of those relationships. And so this was pretty early on in the school year. So we were still cultivating our classroom community and those relationships between them. And they would seek each other out. And the one boy kind of always would overpower the other, right? So he was constantly telling the other child what to do and constantly just like saying yucky and hurtful things. And he was definitely like the power seeking dynamic happening. And the other child would get so frustrated about this. He was so hurt and so upset every single day. This happened for a few days. I let this play out for a couple days just to see, like, are they going to work this out? What's happening here? What dynamic is going on? And so this happened for a couple days. Obviously, I had my eye on this. I knew what was going on. I never let this get physical. I always had them work it out. But I let this dynamic play for a little bit. And probably the third or fourth day, towards the end of the week, a situation arose again, and the child who was upset stormed off on the play yard. On our play yard, he got really upset. He stormed off and he was sitting down next to like a sandbox or something. And he was like, ugh, why? He's so mean to me. And I went and I sat down next to him and I was like, man, you guys are having a rough week. He was like, yeah, he's just so mean to me. He never lets me choose. He never lets me pick the game. He's always telling me what to do. He's saying hurtful things to me. He's just like going on. He's like kind of venting to me about what this has looked like all week for him. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. That's really interesting. You know what I see? He was like, what? And I was like, you're telling me that he treats you really yucky. And every single day you keep going back and playing with him. And it was like a light bulb went off for this child. And he was like, yeah, I'm not going to play with him anymore. And I was like, yeah, if someone's treating you yucky, I wouldn't play with them either. And he was like, yeah, I'm not going to. And so he got up and he went off and he found someone else to play with, right? Like he had to be shown, instead of playing into this victim mentality of this child, right? I helped to establish with him like what was going on and that he had choice in the situation. He did not have to engage in it. Now, just to round this out, this was a relationship between these two children that I continue to work on through the next couple of weeks. And this was not their situation forever. But my point being, he needed to learn that he could set a boundary, that he did not have to be victim to this child treating him not like a friend, right? And again, this is a bully prevention program, this assertiveness skill, bully prevention program, okay? So some of the things you can teach them to do, teach them to move away, teach them to find someone else to play with, teach them to find that safe adult if they need to, if things are physical or really icky or they need help navigating the situation. They can find a different toy to play with. They could choose not to play with that person. They could find a safe space away from that person. This is also reality. If I'm out in public and there is a situation that becomes unsafe, I'm not going to just stay there, right? We don't want to teach our children to just stay in a yucky situation. Okay. It's not like, oh, you have to deal with it, work it out. It's like, no, this is part of your boundary. If you don't like it, if it doesn't feel good to you, then you can move away. Right. And so, same thing. If I was out in public and things started to get unsafe in a situation, I'm not going to sit there and just watch out and play out what happens. I'm going to get up and I'm going to leave. I need to keep my body safe. I need to keep myself safe. Okay. So teach them those things. Again, remember, progress, not perfection. Pick one thing from tonight or today's class to try with your kiddos. Maybe it's that skill of attention. Maybe you really just want to work on highlighting the things that your child is doing well. So you can see more of those behaviors happening. Maybe it's you want to work on a social story. Maybe you have a transition that's going really, really rough with your kiddo and you want to try out that social story strategy. Maybe it's that you want to start trying to find more of those positives, right? We'll talk about that more with positive intent. Maybe you want to work on that skill of assertiveness. Maybe for yourself, you want to work on more of that skill of assertiveness, or maybe you're ready to try to teach that skill to your child in different situations. So remember, progress, not perfection. Pick one thing from tonight's class to try on with your kiddo, with your parenting. And remember, as always, oh, here's my resources. Sorry. If you need any resources, there's some conscious discipline blogs in here. Some of my other recordings are in here. My PDF presentations are in this folder. If you ever need access to any of that, it's here. You can also email me. That's fine too. And don't let yourself become so concerned with raising a good kid that you forget you already have one. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. See you next time.